Hlami Ngwenya from GFRAS, who is going to share a presentation giving us an overview on wearing the scientific goggles, making your work visible as an extension practitioner. This is pretty exciting. Dr. Hlami is going to come to us online. I think she is where? She's in South Africa, and she's going to share extensive information on, I think her presentation should be ready shortly. There we go. And Dr. Hlami, the floor is yours. The room is yours. We'll have two presentations beforehand, and then we'll have the sharing of the recap after that, so that we stay on time.
Elizabeth, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you loud and clear.
Okay, I was still trying to speak, while I was on mute. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for allowing me to join this prestigious, event. Unfortunately, I couldn't be there in person. I was there last week, and I had to rush back, to South Africa. My presentation, it's titled One Shift, Many Ripples, Wearing Scientific Goggles Initiative. It is about equipping practitioner-led inquiring. My name is Hlami Ngwenya. I'm joining you from South Africa. I wear multiple hats. Currently, I'm an associate professor at the University of the Free State and head of research chair in communications for innovations. Let me turn on my video. It's a little bit too, how do I do that? Okay. So that you can be able to see me. Okay, it doesn't matter. Okay, so this presentation is really meant to inspire practitioners around what we call the wearing scientific goggles. Let me start with a hypothetical story of Anna and Grace. Anna and Grace are two women. It could be men, but because I'm a woman, I'll be biased, towards women. It could be men. Anna and Grace are women who has studied together. They got, their bachelor degree in agricultural, sciences, specializing in agricultural extension. Both of them went their different pathways. I will start with Anna. Anna remained in an academic space. She really worked in an academic space where she started teaching agricultural extension. She engaged in curriculum development, but also she had to do some community outreach. She had to publish. We know that, if you are in academic space, you publish or perish. She really anchored herself, in the root of academia. She published many research papers to a level where she became a full professor after 15 years of working in an academic space. In the same breath, Grace, who studied with Anna back then, she opted to go into practice. In practice, she became an extension officer where she worked with, farmers, really helping farmers to solve, real life challenges, innovating, experimenting. They are dealing with issues around climate change, it's food security, it's, market access and all that. But also because she's a very ambitious, person, she also continued, to further her expertise within practice, where she became, an extension manager. She worked in government. When she was working in government, she's really doing a lot of work in terms of, policies. They are innovating and all that. But also she got involved in NGO work where she does, project management. When you're working in and with NGOs, it's really about real challenges. You are experimenting, you are innovating with farmers, you are supporting farmers along the value chains. It's really a lot of, hands-on experiences. She became a farmer also herself because she's practicing within that space. It's about supporting, farmers in market access and all that. 15 years later, she's still working, in practice where she started together with Grace. The irony of the story is that Anna, who remained in academic, most of her publications is about studying the work that Grace is doing. So, because Anna has to publish or perish, then she goes through her community outreach. She comes and observes the work that Grace is doing and write about it and perfect the writing, scientific writing of it. And she climbs through the ladder through her professorship. Another thing that I want to bring to our attention is that most of the stories that are told by Anna, remember this is a hypothetical story, are scientifically grounded. It actually goes through those publications. It's science to the core. But in most cases, some of those stories are biased and distorted, to the realities. The narratives tend to be more of the negative, its limitations. When she writes about extension, she writes about the public extension where public doesn't support extension, or public sector extension is distorted, or extension officers are demotivated. Or she writes about the stories about the value of death, innovations in the value of death, where innovations happens in laboratory, but it doesn't reach the farmers. She writes about the stories where the farmers do not reach access to market and all that. Yes, the stories are correct. However, the stories themselves are at glass half empty. On the other hand, where Grace is working, she sees a different story altogether. She sees extension officers like the ones that are sitting there today, who are motivated, who are sharing experiences, who are innovating with farmers, where uptake of ideas are instant because it's happening there. So the question is, which story is correct? Both stories are correct, but it depends on who writes the story and how the story is framed. Is it the glass half empty, or is it the glass half full? And we always say that who tells the story shapes the narrative. The person who really tells the story shapes the narrative. And in this case, we have Anna and Grace. So there is a story of Anna, there is a story of Grace. Grace is seeing the story in a different way, but because Grace is not the one who's writing about the story, when Anna writes about it, it's very different. It's very different, and she comes up with a lot of recommendations that needs to be done. But we know that we cannot scale recommendations. We have to scale innovations, that is working on the ground. The ground where Anna sees, she sees, positivity. She gets inspired by the work that the farmers are doing. The situation is rich. It's a pity that I'm not there. Who can relate to this story really? And which of the two scenarios do you relate with? Are you Anna or are you Grace? Colleagues, let me take you through my personal journey and what led to the birth of these wearing scientific goggles that we are talking about today. Just about a year ago, precisely, I think, in the next week, it will be 1 month full. I found myself in a threshold moment where On one hand, I am Anna. On the other hand, I am Grace. And I have been Anna and Grace for the past, 35 years. I worked in academia, I'm going to show a little bit, but also I work a lot in practice. So a year ago, I decided to go back to academia, where I got an opportunity to be head of research chair in communications for innovations at the University of the Free State. My role there were very clear because I'm head of research chair. Therefore, I have to publish. I have to supervise those who publish. I have to wear a badge of science. In other words, because in the world of, academia, it's either you publish or perish. But on the other hand, I have a reality where I wear both the head of Anna and the head of Grace. And in this context, I will call myself Anne Grace because I live in both realities and academia and practice. I had to think to myself to say, now that I'm going back to academia, do I have to forget the Grace hat or do I have to wear both? Here, I'm just going to go briefly. So for the past 35 years, I really, really wore both hats. I worked as a high school teacher. I worked, become a manager in government. I worked in academia. I worked with research institutions, international NGO, private sector, farmer organization, you name it. So I really, really work in these two worlds. But I mean, most of you who know me, you know that, this has been my work and all that. I understood and I understand that these two worlds speak different languages. Academia, it's really looking for publications and rigor, the science and all that. But practitioners, on the other hand, it demands, presence, is adaptability. It's about relationships. It's about really, really adapting, in real life and all that. So as I stepped into this position, I asked myself, which hat should I wear? Should I keep the Anna hat or should I keep the Grace hat? Or is there a possibility that I can actually bring both? So that is where the birth of the wearing scientific goggles came about. I had to ask myself, as the head of research chair, what kind of research am I going to drive? How can I really, really bridge the gap between theory and practice? How can I bring my own lived experiences as Anna and Grace into that intersection? How can I work in such a way that I don't trade one hat for the other? I reached out to what I call my scientific goggles. And thanks to my 16-year-old daughter at that time, because I've been talking about these things at home. And then she said, Mama, but I can draw you. So she drew that picture of wearing scientific goggles there. So wearing scientific goggles, it's not the physical goggles per se, but it's the mindset shift, where I had to think about the 34 years experience that I worked in practice. How do I turn that into space where science can be embedded? How if I see that work from the scientific point of view, what will happen? And I can tell you from a practical experience, I couldn't sleep for days because the dopamine effect and the motivation took hold of me. I saw a lot of, possibilities, not in terms of, beginning a different journey into science, but I saw a lot of opportunities by looking back at what I had done in the 34 years and begin to see some gold mines that remained untapped. Once I wore my scientific goggles, I began to look at all the meetings that are facilitated as data set. I'm like, oh, okay, there are meetings there, data set. Every activity that I had done in practice, I saw that as an opportunity for research and really deepening, the learnings and all that. I didn't keep that to myself. I started really asking around and all that. And I could see the dopamine effect was really, really not only for myself. It hit on me to say in the past 34 years, I have met so many graces in the field. Those graces that are doing a lot of work. And it also dawned on me that the graces that I have met are already doing research, but maybe they don't just call it science. And what my colleague, Dr. Carl Lassens, that you have seen there yesterday, the executive secretary of GFRAS, what he will always say is that many practitioners have little professors in their tummies, but they just do not know it. You can imagine that 15 years plus experiences that Anna has done and motivating and doing all that. She has a little professor in her, but she doesn't know it. I also realized that many graces who are sitting in practice are actually sitting on golden field that remains untapped. The gold that sits there, the gold of knowledge that remained, untapped. I also remembered that many graces there who are working in the field, be it in government, in NGOs, in private sector, or in ongoing initiatives and all that, they collectively solve complex adaptive problems in real life. Most importantly, they are holding deep experiential knowledge, but only locked in their heads. That knowledge and experience never get out. They write reports for compliance. It could be a report for government. It could be reports that goes to the donor. They collect a lot of data, but that data, the meaning of what the data means, never really harvested. They have a lot of meaningful impact, but they don't have structure that can actually validate that and really having that meaningful impact validated in the manner that it helps them. They also achieve a lot of impact that goes unrecognized. When you finally write that donor report, you can say, yes, we have reached 10,000 farmers, but the journey towards reaching those farmers remain in the head of Anna. It never really gets documented. And the story of Anna and Grace, or the story of Grace, doesn't end there. Now, when Grace one moment thinks, oh, now I want to go back to the academic space to really, pursue my studies. She goes back, to do her master's. She struggled in terms of what topic am I going to write about. She thinks about the topic. She said, okay, I'm going to do a master's and I'm going to do research on gender. But she leaves the 15-year experience that she has been experimenting. She leaves that data and information and all that. She goes and knocks doors at someone else's place to read a little bit about, gender and all that. Voila, she has a master's and she goes back to working and all that. She thinks, oh, I want to do a PhD, but I'm a breadwinner. I'm working. If I cannot leave my workspace because, who's going to pay for this and all that? Then she let go of that idea of doing her PhD. And every time they go to meetings like that, she looks at Anna, who is a professor, who is celebrated all the time. And yet herself, she doesn't have that title of the knowledge producer because she has not really done it, within the academic spaces. That most valuable knowledge that she sits with over, it could be 15 years, 20 years, remain untapped. It is not documented, it's analyzed, it is not shared anyway. It's really, really sitting. These are the experiences that she sits with in her head. Yet, many theories that are generated in academia are recycled. It could be a theory about project management. It could be a theory about this and that. It's recycled. But the reality of what happens on the ground remains untapped. So there's this gap. It's perpetuated as we go along. So yesterday I was looking at the proceedings from yesterday, and I know that there was a topic about AI. AI doesn't help either, because I always say that artificial intelligence is as intelligent as the person who curate the message in the back end. You go on AI now, you check it. AI goes and look at the things that has been published, and it looks for structure and all that. AI doesn't recognize the story of Grace because the story of Grace remains in her head. AI cannot go and really get out of the internet system and really go and look at the story that is sitting in Grace's head. Because Grace has never documented. Grace has never told the story. Therefore, it perpetuates this knowledge gap between what is happening in the space of Anna and what is happening in the space of Grace. Yeah. AI will only look for stories that are already documented and written. And what does it mean for where we are sitting today? I was there in Uganda last week. I sat, with the CEO, Beatrice. I looked at her journey. If I were to use Beatrice, for example, as Grace, I sat with her, I looked at her journey. I looked at the work that she has done for UFAS for the past 15 years. I look at her, how she stretches the dollar. You give her $10, she stretches it to the core. I look at how she has ignited, these, national, week that we are sitting there and looking. I look at everybody that is sitting in that room who has massive, massive stories that will never make it into the academic spaces and all that. I had to take a conscious decision as head of research chair in the position that I'm sitting to say, from now onwards, the mantra that we go by in my research chair is really trying to find ways of reversing, this status quo. On that note, I took a personal decision to say in my research chair, we are going to innovate by finding ways in which we can elevate the story of Grace and for Grace to get, the recognition that she deserves. We therefore started a meta-action research to translate these wearing scientific goggles from just a metaphor to a fully fledged framework. I embarked on this meta-action research to develop and test a model that will meet Grace where she is. From the academic institution, how do we meet Grace where she is? And not about studying Grace, but really creating an enabling system that support Grace to turn her day-to-day experience into knowledge product of scientific value, while she holds that authorship with legitimacy. So this is really, really a journey to say, what would it take to really, really help Grace to elevate her into the knowledge producer that she deserves to be? Surely, because we are in academic spaces, remember, we either publish or perish, then this meta-action research has to be designed in a scientific way. Definitely, we have a lot of, research questions that we are looking at. I'm not going to go into details with this, but we're going to share this presentation. But really, it's to say, instead of studying what Grace is doing, how do we find a model that will allow Grace where she is and support her in, turning this knowledge into knowledge product of research of scientific value. What should academic institutions do or do differently to meet Grace where she is? There are so many things that we are testing here and all that. But if you allow Grace to wear her own scientific goggles, what kind of motivation comes out? What kind of new theories can be generated, from the ground where Grace is working? What kind of, shifts that we're needing to do into that co-authorship, where an academic person can shed the power to say, because this is a story of Grace, I am not going to take the first authorship, but how do I support Grace to take, the first authorship? So there are so many things that, these wearing scientific goggles is trying to address at multiple levels. I'm not going to bore you with all the challenges that we are trying to address them. Okay. So most importantly, there is something that needs to shift in the academic institutions in order to support, this drive. Either we shift in terms of how we recognize the work of Grace, how we support the work of Grace, even also how do we move an academic institution to the field, not the other way around. Because if Grace has to go to the academic institution, she has to leave the space where she's a breadwinner, and how will it look like that the academic institution go to where Grace is? How then do we structure, this process so that, we allow Grace to flourish where she is? Okay, so, and the co-authorship becomes very crucial in this space. Methodologically, this wearing scientific goggles, it's very, very strategic about the methodology. Participatory research, yes. Action-oriented learning, we see, but the systems thinking, but most importantly, the appreciative inquiry. There are methodologies in where you can look at the glass half full as opposed to the glass half empty. Now, so many stories that we hear are told from the negative, angle. But how can we get the Graces of this world who are innovating and doing, things that are working for farmers? It could be working in a smaller scale and whatnot. How can we tell those stories scientifically? How can we tell those stories of positive impact that is happening? How can we tell them in the scientific manner that that stands the test of, peer-reviewed journals and all that, so that when AI goes and look for stories, the story of Grace is also articulated, it's represented there. At this moment, we are testing, this action in diverse context. We are testing it in ongoing, donor projects, in government, but also with individual practitioners and academic institutions. The beauty is that the uptake of this model, it's very instant. I'm going to share as I'm closing, because people might be asking, how do we do it in reality? How does it look like? I'm going to share 2 examples where we have started, to test this model. The first one, it is within the GFRAS, the Global Forum for Rural Advisory Services, where we are implementing a very huge, EU-funded project. It's called the GPSIEP. It's a very big one. I'm sure you'll hear a lot about that. But really, this project is around accelerating agroecology transition, through rural advisory services. Uganda is one of the countries where we are implementing. It's Uganda, Madagascar, Costa Rica, and Ecuador. When I shared this idea with Dr. Carl, the uptake was so instant. Dr. Carl said, this is a game changer. And because of that, I am not going to just sit back and see how it evolves. I want to be part of the journey. He made available resources in this project so that we can test the model. We are testing it in Uganda, and we have seen a lot of experiences already that are happening there. In Uganda alone, just to show when you shift one narrative, how much gold mine it's sitting, in this project. When we started this project, we developed it as an action learning and all that. You look at the log frame, it has got 5 outputs. This is what the donor is interested in. When we write the donor report, really, we're looking at those 5 outputs, how we have delivered that and all that. But the story to that, it does not really get written. So as a process of really looking at this from wearing scientific goggles, we started looking at the project activities. Those 16 activities, each one of them has a potential for the story. We looked at the baseline, we're looking at the knowledge, attitude, practice, we look at the farm assessment, the surveys and all the things, the agroecology principles, the narrative reports, the field practice. We began to see the stories, many stories that will not necessarily make it into the donor report. And we began to see the people who are part of the project coming up to say, yes, I want to write this story. I want to write this story. I want to write this story. So we are working currently in these 4 countries to see how we can turn project alone. How many mine are we sitting on where we do not really document? I'm going to share just another story again, because now I have to get like the PhD students and all that, and I didn't go through the normal route. I was looking for the graces, who are sitting on tons and tons of experiences and knowledge and whatnot, who under normal circumstances will not turn their experiences because they cannot go back to school, they are breadwinners and all that. I can tell you now proudly that 6 of the PhD students that have enrolled just 2 months ago, none of them 6 months ago were even thinking of doing a PhD. Yeah. But I had to see how then do we take the university to where they are. And now they are enrolled and we are testing this model. What does it mean to have a grace who sit on tons and tons of knowledge and all that? And what would it mean for us as an academic institution? What is it that we need to change? What is it that we need to modify in order to support a grace so that she can turn her day-to-day work, into knowledge product of scientific value? And already for another day, I can tell you some of the changes that we needed to make in order to create, this space for Anna. At the moment, we have a request, from government institutions who are innovating and doing so many things. But when the media talks about them, they talk about governments that are corrupt and all that. But within governments, there are people who are innovating, who are ethical, who are actually doing this. We have, requests, from different, government institutions to say, come and test this model. How can we turn the situation so that we can tell the story in the glass half full? Yes, it requires a lot of change and all that, but is that one shift that we do in order to change, the status quo? The question that we are asking is that, you have one shift, there's multiple ripples. Scientific value lives where inquiry, reflection, and validation meet. So this is what the wearing scientific goggle is all about. And lastly, as I conclude, This model does not suggest that every practitioner has to become a scientist, they have to publish in peer-reviewed journals and all that. No, this is not what we are saying. What we are saying is that, there are multiple formats that people can write stories of scientific value. The difference here is the rigor in which the stories are told. Then Grace will not say, the work that I have done has reached many farmers. Many farmers can mean anything. If you tell that story scientifically, you will say the work that I have reached has reached 10,000 farmers, X number of farmers and whatnot and whatnot. How do we tell those scientific, stories? And there could be multiple pathways in which, these stories can be packaged and shared. But what binds them together is that, it has been tested scientifically, and also it has the name of Grace behind it. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to stop here for now, and I'm willing, to take, some questions for clarity. And I can tell you, it's been a year now, but the dopamine effect is real. In the project that I'm talking about there in Uganda, we have seen people in the past, 2 years who have gone back to school and really begin to claim the space as knowledge producers, so that, they take, they claim the space. And how then do we support them? Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to stop here for now, and I will take, some questions for clarity if there is. So this is the story of Anna and Grace, and Grace, and I'm sure multiple of you can relate, in that story.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hlami. That was very exciting. I now understand why Beatrice was so excited yesterday and told us to look out for this presentation. I was jotting down and taking quite a few pictures, and I'm sure that everyone has now had a dopamine fix this morning and would like to be either a Grace or an Anna. We're going to field 2 questions because we're running out of time. So do we have any questions from the audience?
Sure.
Yes.
Do we have any Grace in the house?
First and foremost, can you hear us, Dr. Hlami?
Loud and clear.
Fantastic.
Okay. Do we have any Grace in the house? Do you have any professor in the house? Sorry? Okay.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hlami. That was very exciting, and I could feel you. I'm not asking a question, but I'm saying a comment. I did agriculture, and I've been an extension worker before. I work with Kabi currently, and I wear both hats, but not just both hats. I'm doing development communication at Kabi. And because I'm doing development communication, I took a decision to do that because I say, as an extension worker, I had access to all the information that I could need. Not that I know everything, but I know somebody who knows. And farmers always say, do you know how to do this? How can I deal with this? And as an extension worker, I say, I know somebody who knows that. And so I took a decision to go into development communication. People say, why are you doing that? Because I see a lot of stories out in the field. I'm actually working one on how we work with 6 districts. People are here on joint crop livestock clinics, something that has changed lives a lot. So I encourage all of us to actually wear those hats. I'm also a researcher at the same time, but to see those stories, and many times we are surrounded by the other biological scientists whose goggles are too dark. I work with several of them, and when you say we need so much to do the development communication activity, you say, no, that's expensive. But finally, when you do it, it is what shouts for the whole program. So I encourage all of us to look at extension, look at development communication very, very critically, because all of us have a space. And I would also call upon you first at Kabi. We do, one scientist says that now blogs seem more important than scientific publications. and we need to write the blogs. So you first, can we have a space to actually write those stories? All of us can write those stories. And it doesn't have to be 1 million farmers. It can be 5, it can be 2, it can be 3, it can be 10. Let us write those stories. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you
The
so
name,
much.
did we get your name? Sorry, before?
Kristen Allocate from Kabi.
Yes.
Another question or another affirmation? We have Beatrice here, and I'm sure Felix is also ready.
Yeah, thank you, my colleague Lami. I just want to encourage, yesterday when I was saying, I think you are convinced that it was worth listening today. And as she said, we have started, we actually have practitioners who have presented their topics. I don't know how many people are here who have presented their topics under the GPSI project. I don't know where the others are. So they are out there and they are going to be coached. And we are actually, I was telling Christine that we are looking for mentors because they have to work alongside the researchers and academicians. But I think what she says, they are the people who have gone through the experience and whatever, they should be seeing themselves owning the work or the writing or the knowledge products. So thank you very much, Lami, even for making it. Yeah. If you want any question, we have our booth as WOOFers, and we have what I wanted lastly, we have a write-up on the GPSI project. I think we gave it out. There is a summary on the GPSI project. It has a very, very good also model itself for the learning platform. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Beatrice. Dr. Hlami?
Thank you. Yes. No, thank you so much. And I like, the lady, I missed her name, from Kabi. And I think that is where partnering with academic institutions becomes very critical. And I would like to take you up for that, because while we are writing, and where the academic institutions will come and turn that into personal growth of people, no? So you write, you publish, but also how then do we support that at the end of the day, you have that master's, or you have, because the accreditation can only come from the academic institution. Even if you work in a research institution, you can publish and whatever, but academically, only academic institutions are accredited, to give you that master's, or to give you that bachelor, or to give that PhD. How then do we work together so that that experience, as we are experiencing and writing and all that, how do we turn it to also recognize? And lastly, we know that in academic institution, if I were to conclude the story of Grace, 10 years, 15 years, when Grace is about to retire, then we give her an honorary doctorate. Okay, why? Because we recognize that what she has been doing in the field has an honor at the doctorate level. Yes, there's nothing wrong with that, but the challenge is that what we are honoring her for never gets back into the academic space. So I am saying, let us not wait for Grace for when she retire. Let's meet Grace where she is now, when she's still generating and all that. Let her experience the journey of writing and gaining that doctorate, through contributing to the body of knowledge, rather than us honoring her when she's about to retire. I'm going to retire now in my presentation. And thank you so much, Beatrice, for really allowing us, to make this presentation and to walking this journey with all of you. The lady from Kabi, they are going to give me your contact details, and then let's see how we can connect. And we need as many mentors as possible, who has this kind of different shift, to say, let us carry at least if any Anna can carry 2 or 3 graces, with them and really change the status quo where we give the space, for grace to be the one who are shining. I'm going to stop here for now. Thank you so much.